What happens when a dangerous motorcycle gang harasses Sandra Bullock at an isolated gas station, completely unaware that Keanu Reeves is watching silently from across the lot? What began as a terrifying confrontation transformed into an extraordinary moment of courage and redemption that would forever change the lives of everyone present. And by the time the dust settled, nobody would ever forget the powerful words Keanu spoke, or the unexpected act of compassion that left hardened men in tears. Oh, and before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing your comments and reactions below. The blistering midday sun hung mercilessly over Highway 14, a lonely stretch of asphalt cutting through the California desert like a scar across the barren landscape. Heat waves distorted the horizon, creating mirages that danced and shimmered in the distance. In this forgotten corner of the Mojave, civilization appeared only in rare, isolated pockets, gas stations and small stores that served as lifelines for travelers brave enough to venture away from the main interstates. The Last Chance fill-up was exactly that kind of place, a weathered oasis with 2 ancient gas pumps, a small convenience store with a faded sign, and a tiny attached diner that served the same greasy menu items it had offered since the 1970s. The building's white paint had long ago surrendered to the relentless sun now peeling away to reveal the weary wooden structure beneath. A broken neon sign buzzed intermittently, struggling to announce that yes, this place was indeed still open for business. Behind the counter inside, Earl Michaels wiped his weathered hands on a stained apron. At 67, Earl had owned this place for over 30 years, watching the world change through the dusty windows of his establishment, while his little corner of it remained frozen in time. The bell above the door jingled, and Earl looked up to see a woman enter, her face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat and large sunglasses. "Afternoon," Earl nodded. The practiced politeness of a man who had greeted thousands of strangers over decades of service. The woman smiled warmly, and despite her attempt to remain anonymous, Earl immediately recognized her. Sandra Bullock, not just any Hollywood actress, but one whose films he'd enjoyed for years. His wife, May, had been a particularly devoted fan before cancer took her 5 years earlier. Earl didn't miss a beat, however. In his estimation, even famous folks deserved their privacy. "Just passing through?" he asked casually, as though she were any other customer. Sandra nodded appreciatively, sensing his discretion. "Yes, just need to fill up. And maybe grab a sandwich, if that's possible." Her voice carried the same warmth that had charmed moviegoers for decades. "Pumps are self-service, but May's special is the best sandwich in 50 miles. Turkey, avocado, and her secret sauce recipe. I still make it exactly how she taught me," Earl said, a hint of pride breaking through his otherwise stoic demeanor. "That sounds perfect," Sandra smiled, sliding a $20 bill across the counter. Earl rang her up, handed back her change, and watched as she walked back outside to fill her modest SUV, a vehicle clearly chosen for practicality rather than flash. He appreciated that. What neither Sandra nor Earl realized was that parked on the far side of the lot, nearly hidden in the shadow of an old storage shed, sat a dust-covered black Porsche. Behind its tinted windows, Keanu Reeves observed the scene with quiet interest. He hadn't planned to stop here. He was on a solo motorcycle trip across the Southwest, his bike secured on a trailer behind his car. But a call from his agent had necessitated a brief pause in his journey to discuss details about an upcoming project. Keanu had recognized Sandra immediately. They'd worked together years ago, formed a friendship that, while not constant, had always remained genuine and warm. He was about to step out and say hello when the distant roar of motorcycles caught his attention. Something about the sound, the aggressive revving pattern, the coordinated approach, made him hesitate. Years of riding had taught him to recognize the difference between everyday bikers and something more troubling. The thunderous rumble grew louder as a pack of motorcycles appeared on the horizon, heat waves distorting their approach like specters materializing from the desert itself. The formation was tight, disciplined, 8 riders moving as one entity, dust billowing behind them like the wake of a destroyer cutting through calm waters. Sandra was midway through filling her tank when she heard them. Something in her posture changed, a barely perceptible stiffening that spoke of an instinctive wariness. She kept her movements casual, but her attention had shifted, peripheral vision tracking the approaching threat while she pretended to focus on the gas pump. The motorcycles pulled into the station in a choreographed maneuver that surrounded the pumps. Their engines didn't cut immediately, but instead growled in a synchronized idle that filled the air with mechanical threat. The lead rider, a massive man with a grey-streaked beard flowing from beneath his helmet, finally silenced his engine and dismounted. The others followed suit, creating a wall of leather, denim, and tattooed flesh. From inside the store, Earl watched with growing concern. He'd seen the Cold Blood Riders before, a notorious motorcycle gang with chapters across 3 states. They weren't just weekend enthusiasts. These were men with criminal histories, territorial and unpredictable. Earl's hand moved slowly beneath the counter, fingers wrapping around the shotgun he kept mounted there. Inside his Porsche, Keanu's body tensed. He recognized the patches on their jackets, not just any motorcycle club, but one with a reputation for violence and intimidation. His hand reached for the door handle, but he held back, reading the situation, waiting for the right moment. Escalating too early could make things worse. The lead rider removed his helmet, revealing a face mapped with the harsh geography of a difficult life. Scars interrupted his beard, one particularly prominent one slicing from his left temple down to his jaw. His eyes, sharp and calculating, fixed on Sandra with predatory interest. "Well, well," he said, voice carrying easily across the quiet station. "Look what we found in the middle of nowhere, boys. America's sweetheart herself." The mock politeness in his tone carried an undercurrent of menace. Sandra maintained her composure, keeping her movements deliberate and calm as she replaced the gas nozzle. "Just passing through," she said evenly, not engaging with the recognition but not denying it either. The leader, Viper, as the patch on his vest proclaimed, stepped closer, invading her personal space with deliberate intent. "Seems a waste. A fine lady like yourself traveling all alone. Not safe out here. All kinds of dangerous elements." He gestured around theatrically, the irony of his statement hanging heavy in the air. Sandra took a measured step back, maintaining eye contact. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine. Just finishing up here." Viper smiled, revealing a gold tooth among otherwise yellowed ones. "Thing is, we're big fans, aren't we, boys?" This elicited chuckles and murmurs of agreement from his companions, who had formed a loose semicircle around Sandra's vehicle, effectively cutting off easy escape. "And when we meet a celebrity, well, we like to get a little souvenir, maybe a photo, maybe an autograph." He pulled out a phone. "Or maybe just a little video to remember the occasion." Sandra's expression remained neutral, but her eyes darted briefly toward the store, calculating her options. "I'm in a bit of a hurry today, but I'd be happy to sign something quickly." Viper's smile faded slightly. "Nah, that's not gonna cut it. See, we don't get many opportunities like this. And my boys, they've been on the road a long time. They could use some entertainment." One of the other riders moved closer, a lanky man with prison tattoos on his knuckles. "How about a little kiss for the camera, sweetheart?" he suggested, leering. Inside the store, Earl had seen enough. He lifted the shotgun from its mount and moved toward the door, old legs carrying him as quickly as they could, his heart hammered in his chest. He was no hero, and these men were dangerous, but he couldn't stand by and watch this happen. Keanu had also reached his breaking point. In one fluid motion, he exited his vehicle, moving with the quiet confidence of a man who had trained extensively in martial arts for his film roles. training he had continued and expanded upon throughout his life as a personal discipline. Unlike his on-screen personas, however, Keanu understood that real violence was unpredictable and dangerous. His approach wasn't aggressive but measured, strategic. Before either Earl or Keanu could intervene, Sandra made her move. With the calculated precision of someone who had studied action sequences under professional stunt coordinators, she sprayed the gas nozzle directly at Viper's face, temporarily blinding him, then used the moment of shock to slip between two of the surrounding bikers. "You crazy bitch!" Viper howled, wiping furiously at his eyes. "Grab her!" Two bikers moved to intercept Sandra, but their actions were interrupted by the distinctive sound of a shotgun being cocked. Earl stood at the store entrance, the weapon held with the confidence of a Vietnam veteran who had never quite left the war behind. "That's enough!" Earl called out, his voice steady despite the rapid pounding of his heart. "The lady's made it clear she's not interested in your company." Viper's expression darkened as he assessed this new threat. The other bikers tensed, hands moving toward concealed weapons. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move could transform this confrontation into something far more tragic. And that's when Keanu Reeves stepped into view, positioning himself between Sandra and the bikers with casual precision. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the same calm intensity that had defined many of his most iconic roles. "I think we have a misunderstanding here." The recognition was immediate. Even among these hardened men, the presence of John Wick himself, a character who had achieved cult status even in the criminal underworld, created a momentary pause. "Well, would you look at that?" Viper recovered first, smirking through his discomfort. "Two celebrities for the price of one. Must be our lucky day." Keanu's expression remained neutral, but his stance, relaxed yet ready, spoke volumes to men who understood the language of physical confrontation. "There's no luck involved," he said evenly. "I was having coffee with my friend when you arrived." The lie was delivered with such conviction that even Sandra blinked in surprise. "Is that right?" Viper's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "It is," Keanu confirmed. "And now we're both leaving. No trouble necessary." Viper laughed, a harsh sound like gravel being crushed. "That's not how this works, Hollywood. You don't give the orders here." "I'm not giving orders," Keanu replied, his voice dropping slightly. "I'm offering a choice." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, the complete absence of fear, caused several of the bikers to exchange uneasy glances. They had encountered all types of men in their time, from the boastful to the desperate, but there was something different about Keanu's quiet confidence. Earl still held his shotgun steady, creating a second problem for the bikers to contend with. The odds were still in their favor, but the potential cost had risen significantly. Viper assessed the situation, calculating risk versus reward. His reputation was on the line. Backing down would show weakness, but escalating could lead to consequences none of them had bargained for. What happened next would change the course of everyone's lives in ways none could have predicted. Viper took a step forward, deliberately invading Keanu's personal space. "You know who we are?" he asked, voice low and threatening. "Cold Blood Riders," Keanu answered without hesitation. "Southern California chapter, led by Vincent Viper Malloy since 2011 after the previous president went to prison for racketeering." The accuracy of this information visibly startled Viper, creating another momentary pause in the confrontation. Keanu continued, his voice remaining conversational, almost friendly. "For my films, I research extensively. I've spent time with clubs all over the country, some law-abiding, others," he let the implication hang in the air, "but all of them lived by a code." He gestured toward Sandra. "And harassing a woman alone at a gas station, that doesn't fit any honorable code I've encountered." A flicker of something, perhaps shame, perhaps just uncertainty, crossed Viper's weathered face. Keanu pressed the advantage. The riders I respected most were the ones who protected the vulnerable, not those who preyed on them. One of the older bikers in the back shifted uncomfortably. This philosophical appeal to honor might have seemed absurd coming from anyone else, but delivered by Keanu Reeves, a man known for his authenticity both on and off screen, it carried unexpected weight. "We're just having some fun," Viper growled, but the conviction in his voice had diminished slightly. "At someone else's expense," Keanu countered. "That's not fun. That's bullying. And I think you're better than that." Earl watched this exchange with growing amazement. The shotgun in his hands remained steady, but his perception of the situation was shifting. This wasn't just about defusing a confrontation anymore. Something deeper was happening. Sandra had used the distraction to position herself closer to Earl, ready to retreat into the store if necessary. But like Earl, she found herself captivated by Keanu's approach. Where most would have escalated with threats or bravado, he was attempting something far more difficult, appealing to these men's better nature. Viper's face contorted with conflicting emotions, anger at being challenged, but also a reluctant respect for the man standing before him. "You don't know anything about me or what I am," he finally said. "Maybe not," Keanu acknowledged with a slight nod. "But I know we all have choices. Every day, every moment, we choose who we want to be." He gestured around at the group. "Right now, all of you are choosing what kind of men you are." There was a long, tense silence as Viper considered these words. The desert wind whispered across the gas station, stirring up small dust devils that danced between them. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily against the azure sky, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. What happened next would astonish everyone present. Viper took a step back, a subtle but significant retreat. "Boys," he said, not taking his eyes off Keanu, "we're burning daylight. Fontana's still 50 miles away." The other bikers seemed momentarily confused by this change of direction, but years of following Viper's lead took over. They began to move back toward their motorcycles, some casting lingering glances at Sandra and Keanu. Earl lowered his shotgun slightly, hardly believing what he was witnessing. Before mounting his bike, Viper turned back to Keanu. "Liked you better in Point Break?" he said, a grudging smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Keanu's expression remained serious. "Be the Bill, not the Johnny Utah," he replied, referencing characters from the film in a way that carried additional meaning for those who knew the story. Viper actually laughed at this, a genuine sound that momentarily transformed his hardened features. "Maybe next time," he said cryptically, before pulling on his helmet. The bikers roared away in formation, their departure as coordinated as their arrival had been. Within moments, they were nothing more than a dust cloud dissipating on the horizon, the growl of their engines fading into the vast desert silence. Only when they had completely disappeared did Earl finally lower his shotgun fully. "In 30 years, he said shakily, "I've never seen anything like that." Sandra approached Keanu, genuine awe in her expression. "That was incredible," she said quietly. "How did you know that would work?" Keanu shrugged, his demeanor shifting back to his more familiar, somewhat shy persona. "I didn't. But I've found that most people respond to being treated with respect, even when they don't seem to deserve it." Earl invited them both inside, locking the door behind them just in case the bikers had second thoughts. As he prepared sandwiches for them at the small diner counter, Sandra and Keanu sat side by side, the conversation flowing easily between old friends reconnecting after years apart. "So you just happened to be here?" Sandra asked incredulously. "Of all the gas stations in all the desert?" Keanu smiled. "I'm on a motorcycle trip, was trailering my bike to a starting point when I needed to take a call. Pure coincidence." "Some coincidence," Sandra muttered, shaking her head. You realize you just talked down one of the most dangerous motorcycle gangs in California? Keanu accepted the sandwich Earl placed before him with a grateful nod. Everyone has a story, he said simply. Even men like that. Sometimes they just need to be reminded of who they could be, rather than who they've been. Earl brought coffee for all three of them, then settled on a stool across the counter. My May would have loved this, he said wistfully. Her two favorite actors in her little diner, like something out of one of her dreams. Something in his tone caught Sandra's attention. May? My wife, Earl clarified. Passed 5 years ago. Cancer. He gestured around the small establishment. We built this place together back in '86. She always handled the food, had a way with flavors I could never match. But I keep making her recipes. Keeps her with me somehow. Keanu raised his coffee mug slightly. To May, he said solemnly. To May, Sandra echoed, raising her own cup. Earl's eyes glistened with unexpected moisture. Thank you, he said gruffly. As they ate, the conversation drifted to Earl's life, the challenges of maintaining a business in such a remote location, and the changing landscape of the area over the decades. Both actors listened with genuine interest, asking questions and engaging in a way that made Earl feel truly seen, perhaps for the first time since May's passing. Business has been slow these past few years, Earl admitted. Interstate took most of the traffic. Big chains opened up better places to stop. Been thinking about selling, but... He gazed around wistfully. So many memories here. Sandra and Keanu exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. What if you didn't have to choose between keeping your memories and moving forward? Sandra asked carefully. Earl frowned. Not following you. Keanu leaned forward slightly. What if we helped you update the place? Make it viable again, but keep its character? Earl's eyebrows shot up. You two would do that? Why? Sandra smiled warmly. Because sometimes people deserve a break. And you were willing to face down a biker gang with a shotgun for a complete stranger. That says something about who you are. What followed was a conversation that would transform Last Chance Fill-Up from a dying relic into something new while honoring its history. They discussed creating a classic Americana-themed stop that would attract tourists and travelers seeking an authentic experience rather than just another cookie-cutter convenience store. As the afternoon stretched into evening, plans were sketched on paper napkins. Sandra, drawing on her business acumen from various entrepreneurial ventures, outlined marketing strategies. Keanu, who had a surprising knowledge of architecture and design from his own real estate investments, suggested structural improvements that would preserve the building's character while making it more functional. Earl listened in growing amazement as these two Hollywood stars, people who had absolutely no reason to care about his struggling business, invested their time and expertise in imagining a new future for his beloved establishment. I don't know what to say, he finally admitted, overwhelmed by their generosity. Say you'll let us help, Sandra replied simply. Earl nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. As twilight descended over the desert, casting long shadows across the weathered gas station, Sandra and Keanu prepared to continue their separate journeys. But something had changed. A connection had been formed between three unlikely individuals. I'll have my business manager call you tomorrow, Sandra told Earl as they stood in the parking lot. We'll get the ball rolling on everything we discussed. Keanu handed Earl a card with his private contact information. And I know some excellent contractors who specialize in historical renovations. They're discreet and trustworthy. Earl looked between them, still struggling to process everything that had happened. I don't know how I'll ever repay you both. Keep making May's special exactly as it is, Sandra said with a gentle smile. That sandwich alone is worth the investment. As they prepared to depart, a cloud of dust on the horizon caught their attention. Earl tensed, reaching instinctively for the shotgun he'd returned to its place behind the counter. "It's them," he said grimly. "They're coming back." The motorcycle gang reappeared, approaching with the same intimidating formation as before. But this time, they simply pulled up to the pumps and cut their engines. Viper dismounted and walked toward the three of them, his expression unreadable beneath his sunglasses. Keanu moved subtly, once again positioning himself protectively. "Forgot something," Viper said gruffly when he reached them. He extended a weathered hand toward Sandra. "Wanted to apologize properly to the lady. What happened earlier, that's not who we are, or at least, not who we should be." Sandra hesitated only briefly before accepting his handshake. "Apology accepted," she said with genuine grace. Viper turned to Keanu next. "What you said about choices, been thinking about that." Keanu simply nodded, waiting. "Got a nephew," Viper continued, seeming to struggle with the words. "Good kid, 17, smart, but he's starting to head down the wrong path, looking up to all this." He gestured to the gang lifestyle embodied in his clothing and tattoos. "His mum, my sister, she's tried everything to straighten him out." "Sometimes it takes a different voice to get through," Keanu observed quietly. Viper nodded. Would you be willing to talk to him? Not as some kind of celebrity thing. Just man to man, about choices." The request was so unexpected, so genuine in its vulnerability, that even Keanu seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "I'd be honored," he finally said, the simplicity of his response carrying more weight than any elaborate promise could have. Something shifted in Viper's posture, a nearly imperceptible relaxation, as though a burden had been partially lifted. He reached into his vest and pulled out a business card, worn at the edges. "My real name and number," he explained, handing it to Keanu. "Not many people have this." As Viper turned to leave, Earl called out, "Your boys hungry? Got food inside if you want it." Viper looked back, genuine surprise registering on his face. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "Been a long ride. Wouldn't say no to that." What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary scene the Last Chance Philip had witnessed in its long history. Hollywood royalty and hardened bikers sharing a meal in Earl's tiny diner, the barriers of their different worlds temporarily suspended in this liminal desert space. As night fully descended and stars appeared in the vast desert sky, the bikers finally departed, but not before each had shaken hands with Earl, Sandra, and Keanu. The atmosphere was different now, respect having replaced intimidation. "See you around, Earl," Viper called as they mounted their bikes. "We ride through here regular. Good to know there's a decent place to stop." After the bikers departed, Sandra turned to Keanu with wonder in her eyes. "You didn't just defuse the situation," she said. "You transformed it." Keanu shook his head slightly. "People transform themselves when given the chance. I just created a moment where that was possible." As they said their final goodbyes, Earl watched his unexpected saviors drive away in opposite directions, Sandra toward Los Angeles, Keanu continuing east into the desert night. The old man stood outside his gas station for a long time afterward, looking up at the stars and thinking about May, about chances and choices, about the strange and wonderful ways lives could intersect. 6 months later, the grand reopening of May's Last Chance Oasis drew a crowd that stretched down the highway. The building had been lovingly restored, its vintage character enhanced rather than replaced. Old gas pumps stood alongside modern ones, the diner had been expanded, and a small museum of Route 66 memorabilia occupied one corner. Earl, dressed in a crisp new uniform that still managed to look comfortably worn, cut the ribbon with trembling hands. On either side of him stood Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves, their presence drawing media attention that ensured the new business would not suffer from lack of publicity. Less noticed by the press, but equally significant to Earl, was the line of motorcycles parked neatly at the edge of the lot, Viper and his crew having arrived early that morning to help with final preparations for the opening. As cameras flashed and reporters called questions, Earl looked around at the unlikely collection of people who had become part of his life's story. The Hollywood stars, the bikers, the curious locals, all brought together by a series of chances and choices that had begun on an ordinary day at a forgotten gas station. May would have loved this, he whispered to himself, feeling her presence more strongly than he had in years. And somewhere, perhaps in the gentle desert breeze that ruffled the new awning, or in the perfect taste of the sandwiches being served inside, or in the laughter of the gathered crowd, May's spirit seemed to answer, "Some things are worth waiting for." What had begun as a potentially dangerous confrontation had transformed into a moment of connection that spiraled outward, touching life after life in ways that would continue long after that day. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary stories begin in the most ordinary places, and sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they just treat others with unexpected kindness and respect, creating spaces where people can choose to be their better selves. And that, perhaps, is the greatest superpower of all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more inspiring true stories about celebrities making a difference. And tell us in the comments, what's the most unexpected act of kindness you've ever witnessed? Remember, we're all just one moment away from changing someone's life forever.